It's long been observed that there are proportionally more atheists on university campuses than in the population at large. This is particularly so within the sciences and at more elite research universities. Now, the gap does seem to be shrinking as the group of nuns or people with no religion has been the fastest growing religious demographic in the United States for a couple of decades now. But still, the question I'm asking here is, why has atheism remained more common on campuses than off of campuses? Close to 10 years ago, when I was still an atheist and ardent in my atheism, I wrote a blog article that I'll link below, trying to make sense of this. Now, while I'm now a moderate Christian, I still stand behind everything that I wrote. So I'm going to be talking about that. And I'll start off by saying this video is not about the truth of atheism or theism, but about social and psychological reasons for atheism versus versus religious participation. So one theory to account for this, which is popular among atheists and academic atheists for obvious reason, is that atheism is more common on university campuses because people on university campuses are, generally speaking, of above average intelligence and engage more frequently in philosophical discussion and are more exposed to the sciences. And so all these things make them less vulnerable to falling for religious fairy tales, and also it results in them having less need to have them in the first place. So people in such a community would be more likely, for example, to recognize that if you posit God as an explanation for everything, you've not made the problem smaller, you've actually made it bigger. Because now, instead of having to explain the universe and everything within it, you now have to explain how there could be a creator that is so amazing that they're able to create all of this creation. The problem isn't smaller, it's bigger. We've merely pushed it back one step. People in an academic community are also more likely to be familiar with Big Bang cosmology as a partial explanation for the existence, properties, past and future of the universe. Now, in my opinion, Big Bang cosmology does not do a sufficient job in explaining how there could have been the conditions that would have allowed for the Big Bang to occur, whether those conditions were eternal or if something else caused them, and if so, how. But nevertheless, we may have made the problem smaller. We have less to explain now. And that there is progress, right? You know, God, the gaps where people often insert God just got smaller. People on campuses are also more likely to be familiar with evolutionary theory, which is perhaps the most elegant theory in the history of science, which explains the incredible, precisely configured complexity and functionality of all living organisms without having to invoke a creator. And there are also naturalistic theories on the development of the first reproducing cells. Now, could these be wrong? Absolutely. But once again, we are getting these accounts of nature that get rid of the need for a creator, and good evidence is being put forth to sustain the claims. So to summarize, what science is allowing us to do is to explain great complexity from simpler naturalistic beginnings without having to invoke a creator that is as or more difficult to explain than the creation. So this is something that people on campus may be generally more familiar with. And people on campuses, they're also, they've on average probably had more exposure to questions such as, why would a good God allow for evil? Or why was slavery portrayed as acceptable in the Bible? And they're also in an environment where they will often be exposed to people of a wider variety of beliefs and be in a place where it's relatively okay to talk about things like religion and politics, for example. And so it's when you start hearing a wider variety of beliefs, it can result in you having increased doubt as to the validity of any single particular one of them. For example, maybe there is a God, but maybe it's that person's God and not the God of my book. So there definitely are very good reasons to not believe. And perhaps people on university campuses are getting more exposure to them on average. And in the future, I think I've had some atheists ask me how on earth I, as an ardent atheist, could become a Christian. And I've had a few Christians ask me why I was ever an atheist. And so I think in the future, soon enough, I will do videos making the case for agnostic atheism just as strongly as I would have as an atheist. And then I will explain the case that won me over to Christ. So that'll come in due course. And going back, so when I wrote the article, as an atheist, I definitely had no problem believing that I and other members of the academy were smarter and more intellectually sophisticated. But even as an atheist, even then, I had a feeling that there were other things at play in addition to this. And those other things may even be a bigger factor. So let's start getting into those things. So when you're a student, in many ways, you may not need religion as much as you may later in life. For lifelong academics, and for lifelong academics, like people that become professors and that's their life, that later in life may never come. We need purpose and meaning and a sense of belonging and a feeling that we're in the right place doing the right thing. We also seek to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, perhaps as a means of creating a sense of belonging with fellow travelers, perhaps as a means of allaying our own neuroticism by extending our views outside of ourselves. There's lots of ways we can do this. It's like identifying as a metalhead in high school is it's like you're picking a tribe, for example. Church and synagogue and temple, like those are mosque, those are other ones. There's lots, political movements, activism for causes. It's common to look for something to be a part of that is bigger than you. And the academic community can provide for really probably all of this. So here's theory 2. The academic community is capable of providing many of the benefits of religious conviction and community without the religious conviction and the community. So let's break that down. First off, purpose and meaning. It's very hard for us to live a satisfying life if we lack these things, and if we have serious doubts about if we're doing the right thing and what we should be doing. Now, if you're a student or a faculty member, you have clear purposes and you have great reason to believe that you are where you should be. If you're a high school student who wants to go to university, then your path is clear. Study and work hard to get there. If you're in university and want to proceed on to grad school or professional school, the same deal as with the high school students. If you're a tenure track professor, you work hard to get tenure. And if you have tenure, well, now perhaps you're trying to be a high achiever among high achievers. And perhaps you also have a sense of duty to your graduate students to help them get to where you are because you know what it was like to be in their shoes. Then there's the issue of ill-defined problems versus well-defined problems. A well-defined problem is where you know where you're starting, you know where you want to get to, and you have a very clear idea as to the path of steps you will need to take to get from the origin to the desired endpoint. An ill-defined problem, however, is a situation where maybe you can't define where you are and or where you want to be and or the steps to get you there. So you might not know what you're doing or why you're doing it or why you should do it and how you should do it. Well-defined problems are often much easier to address than ill-defined problems because much of the work is already done for you. And in academia, the problems tend to be very well-defined. So, first year predictably leads to second year. Studying harder predictably leads to better grades. Better grades can lead to better future opportunities. And further, since our entire culture strongly endorses higher education, there can often be little doubt that you are choosing the right challenges. The pursuit of these challenges can be very exciting because you are pursuing forms of excellence that are highly valued by your society. So my strong suspicion is that people who already have a confident sense that they are doing what they are supposed to be doing, wherein there is a predictable upward trajectory toward one valued goal after another, and when they have the excitement that comes from that, they're going to be less likely to need what religious community has to offer. So that's a big thing right there. And another big thing is, particularly in undergrad, everything you're doing is about you. It's like you may not like every class you take. You may not like having to take that statistics class, for example, to get your psych degree. But At the end of the day, it's all for your own development. But by comparison, when you're outside the university, it's not about you, but about what you can do for your employer or your client. And maybe you're not in the right place doing the right thing for you. Like, maybe with school, there's little doubt that school's the right thing. But should I be working for this company or that company, in this industry or that industry, in this role or that role? That is way it's way less certain. And maybe there isn't a predictable path toward your next step forward in your career. Who knows if and when the position above yours is going to open up for you to apply to, and who knows when those options for upward mobility stop because you're at the highest part of the ladder and there's nowhere to go but stay where you are. So now you're in a situation where, after years of it being substantially all about you and having relative certainty that you were doing the right things and knowing precisely what to do to advance and when you could expect that advancement to come, this new reality can be very disillusioning. And people who are feeling disillusioned are, on average, going to be more likely to seek answers and solutions. The Bible talks a lot about how often it is the broken that find the path to Christ before the unbroken. And that makes sense, because if you're not broken, there's no problem. And if there's no problem, there's no need for a new solution. But if there is a problem in need of solving and you're not getting the answers from contemporary society, maybe looking back to older wisdom and that which has endured for hundreds and thousands of years starts seeming increasingly attractive. So that's big. Now let's talk about belongingness. We are a social species. Our roots are inherently tribal. We evolved to be interdependent. And to the extent that we are disconnected from others, we are made extremely vulnerable. Exiling someone or viewing them as an untouchable is among the most devastating things that can be done to a person. Prisoners would often rather be in the direct company of other prisoners who could possibly hurt them, as opposed to being in solitary confinement. Today, we live in a very fragmentary society. Our families are smaller, more often broken, more often spread out geographically, such that ties among relatives are nowhere near as strong as they might have been several decades ago or longer. We move around a lot, so do our neighbors. And so we don't have a sense of connection to our environment and the people within it that is anywhere near as strong as it might have been a few generations ago. We also switch jobs, we switch schools, as do our peers. And so in many ways, one of the very few stable human features of our lives is ourselves. But when you're younger, you get more sources of belonging. You have your family who you still live with, even if it's just one parent. At school, you are surrounded by people in the same life stage as you who are facing many similar challenges. Not all the same, but basically, you're all in school, you're all developing, all that kind of thing. You all live pretty close to each other. In university, most of this is well preserved. The only thing that's not as well preserved, I would say, is that they're living close to each other. You'll start having commuter students, but even then, if you're on campus, a lot of students will live on or near the campus. But when you enter the work world, you will be working with people at all different ages and life stages who live in disparate places around town, who do or do not have kids, etc. As was once said by the Tim character on The British Office, pretty much the only thing you share with most of your coworkers is the same carpeted floor that you all live on for 40 hours a week. And relatedly, after I left my graduate program in cognitive psychology, I went and taught English in Korea for a while, and I actually kind of found that to be, in a way, sort of like a continuation of the undergraduate experience, because just like in the undergraduate experience, I was in a new world. I was no longer at my parents' house. And I was surrounded by people in the exact same circumstance as me. They're in a new world too, like other teachers from the States, Canada, Australia, England, New Zealand, and so forth. And so, it was like this, there was a lot of similarity there, new world, peers that you're connected to by the fact that you all know that you're in this new world, and you guys at the very least have that one thing in common, as well as your language. So now, moving on from belonging, let's talk about something that often overlaps, which is the desire to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And a lot of us, especially a lot of atheists, maybe they're not inclined to believe that this is something they want. But I think it is something that most, if not all of us, or the grand majority of us, do. In the church, that's this something bigger than ourselves usually refers to either God or to your community. As Jesus in the New Testament, he was once asked, what are the most important commandments? And Jesus is written to have said, first, hold God above all else, and second, love your neighbor as yourself. So for me, in my unorthodox way of interpreting Christianity and so forth, for me, holding God above all else basically means holding the sum total above any of the parts, hold the Tao, the greatest wisdom above all else, and then loving your neighbor as yourself. Very big deals. Now, academia offers many paths to transcendence too. So, there is the transcendence of the possibility of expanding human knowledge beyond where it has ever been before. That's a big one. There's the idealism of spreading information and wisdom. There is the forum for social and political activism in pursuit of a transcendent justice. Then there's the pride of belonging to one of society's most esteemed social clubs, the university. So the university, no doubt, is providing a lot of very significant psychological and social services to the people in it. And those are often backgrounded, but they're huge. And some atheists have criticized people of faith for being so weak that they need the crutch of religion. But perhaps the reason that some atheists don't need this crutch is because they have another one. The university, for example. And that's not me being dismissive. I'm just using the same terminology. But basically, they're getting their belonging and their sense of meaning and purpose and community. They're getting that. They're just getting it from somewhere else. And great. But that isn't open to everyone. Not everyone is made for university, and eventually you get past the stage where if you go to university for undergrad as a 40-year-old, you're not going to get the sense of community you'd get because you're basically old enough to be all your classmates' parents. So in a society which is hyper-individualistic, where our social networks are often transitory and weak, and where many of us are not feeling fulfilled through our work, and, when a few cognitive behavioral therapy sessions and a psych med or two just isn't enough, some people are going to go back to old wisdom. And they're going to join another kind of enduring community, a religious community, where relationships can last for decades, where one can be a part of something akin to an extended family, and where, again, the focus is on something bigger than the self and something that unifies you and connects you with other people. So to atheists and, in the university community, you're in a great place. But you may be surprised that once you leave it, things are very different. And that may, too, leave you feeling disillusioned. And you might, maybe, start thinking about doing the unthinkable, going to church.